welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's podcast, Turn the Page, and I'm really excited today to have this author here. You have written for film, and I'm told you did pretty good with that, right?
Yes, I wrote a film called Letters from Iwo Jima for Clint Eastwood, and it got nominated for a number of awards, including an Academy Award nominated for Academy Award for screenwriting. So it's very
So that's
exciting.
pretty cool because, you might, listeners, you might have heard of Letters from Iwo Jima, or, Clint Eastwood might be a familiar name, and the Academy Awards, that's kind of a big deal. So welcome, Iris Yamashita. I am so excited to have you today to talk about this book, Village in the Dark. This is actually a sequel, am I correct?
Yes, that's correct. The first book was called City Under One Roof, and the sequel is Village in the Dark.
So I really enjoyed the book. I liked the settings and I liked the characters a lot. So it is set in Alaska, and it's a bit of a emotional domestic thriller slash police procedural, and it's got a lot of really great stuff and a really great characters in it. But Cara is the one who's like the main focus character. That's really the one that is carried over from the first book. So, I know that you kind of left the door open for more stories for Cara. Did you immediately know where you were going when you started writing Village in the Dark?
Yes, I had a two-book deal, so I kind of knew that I would be writing this second book. And I mean, it's ended here, but I'm not saying that I won't go back to Detective Cara Kennedy, but the next book that I have planned is not in this world. But again, I'm not saying I won't go back. It's just I don't have an idea yet. But yes, she's the main protagonist, Detective Cara Kennedy. Uh, it in the first book, it starts in it's called City Under One Roof. So this weird, strange city actually is under one roof, in that all the 200 and some residents live in a single high-rise building. And she does go back to this world in the second book, but then I also introduce another world, which is the Village in the Dark, and that is an off-the-grid, woman-run village, and very isolated and kind of hidden.
So that is Unity that you're talking about, and so Cara is the focal point almost, and she finds out in the very beginning of the book. It's not a spoiler because it is literally in the synopsis that her young son and her husband, who had passed, believed to be in a hiking accident, that things might not be as they seemed. So the book actually opens with poor Cara literally opening their graves, and trying to find out, what might have been missed and what's going on. But you also have two other stories. You have the story of Ellie, who had been sort of a criminal, and she and her ex had a son, and she ended up kind of throwing him under the bus and trying to live the good life, which, she really hoped things would be better for her son, but things don't always turn out the way that we hope. And then there is Mia, and Mia is sort of this connection to what they all want to find out, but also she's the connection to the Village in the Dark that you kind of mentioned. And she's a really interesting character. Um, would you like to, first of all, just tell us a little bit about Unity and sort of where all of that came from, and then just how Mia originally came into Cara and Ellie's stories when you were writing this?
Yeah, when I was doing research for the first book on Alaska and discovered that it's the state with like the highest incidences of domestic violence against women, I kind of wanted to bring that in the spotlight. And it was particularly the statistics show that the incidences are particularly high among Indigenous women. And I just had this kind of idea that I wanted to see uh, a woman-led village where the women are kind of kick-ass, like they're strong. I'm not sure if I was allowed to say that on here,
First,
but
first of all, yes, you can say that.
okay.
My big joke is that the litmus test for that was kind of passed with one of Syosset's alum is actually Judd Apatow, and he was the first person to officially drop the S bomb on Turn the Page.
Oh,
And when I asked my director, I'm like, "Do we keep this in?" She's like, "Listen," she's like, "if people don't expect Judd Apatow to drop the S bomb,
yeah,
I don't know what we're doing here." So you are in good
exactly.
company.
Okay.
Yeah, so go
So,
ahead. Kick ass is
yeah.
like really like low down on that
Okay, good.
scale of,
All right.
words that have been dropped on Turn the Page.
Okay, good. So yes, so I just was trying to imagine what that kind of community would be like, and it's a hodgepodge. It's welcoming to all women who have suffered from domestic violence or have some reason they don't want to be living in what they call man's world. So because I wanted it to be open, because I'm not an expert on the various indigenous tribes of Alaska, I put a number of them in there, and also non-indigenous people as well, so that this world is completely fictional and I could make up whatever rules. And even I play with their language, where they just speak a hodgepodge. It's not any one language. And so Mia is a product of that. And she actually is half Ainu, which is a Japanese indigenous group. And because I kind of thought as I was reading and researching on Alaskan tribes, that there was quite a bit of similarity. And I just thought that was cool. Like there's a kinship there. And I wanted to have a character in there. She's half Ainu, half just half white. So she grows up in this village and not knowing anything about man's world and wanting to eat from the fruit of knowledge and kind of goes out. And in a way, I feel like she gets corrupted when she leaves.
Yeah, unfortunately for Mia, it all starts. It's funny, and I was, man, I have to say, I was kind of hoping because it felt so real when I'm reading it. I'm like, is is there actually villages like this? Because, that's amazing. It's super, and it was so well written. Yeah, she goes out to man's world literally because she meets someone that she thinks might be a boyfriend. And as one does when they're young, and they often find that first person, they find out that that first person is literally not what they think or who they say. And she goes through like sort of a series of identities and jobs, which you later find out she just kind of like rubs elbows with people who are involved in Cara and Ellie's story. And that's kind of where I'm going to stop with that because there is spoilers there. I do really love just sort of Mia's observations, though, about man's world. I think my favorite line, and I had it written down, was that everything was for sale in man's world. Religion, politics, love, everything's for sale. And it was just sort of an interesting way to look through somebody's eyes and see things that way, because we say that we realize that, everything is marketing and everything is sort of, for sale, but to kind of hear it from a character who literally never experienced it, there's really like no tongue-in-cheek way of saying it, or like, yeah, everything has a price. Like literally she's like, oh my goodness, everything has a price. It was just sort of a knock to the head. So it's like you have Cara, who was a cop, and she comes from a certain world, and her whole inception in the first book with the quirky high-rise city was really interesting. But then, you have her here, and she's trying to figure out what happened to her husband and son. You have Ellie, who started off the opposite, and then they had Timmy, and she was like, yeah, I have to try to do better for my kid. And then you have Mia, who just was almost like, compared to those two ends, she was almost like a blank slate, and she's sort of absorbing things. So it's really difficult not to get corrupted by that world when you're just sort of, you need to, first of all, it's there's a survival instinct there, and also just all of this stimulation that you never had. So it was really just sort of fascinating reading the story, alternating between the third character, the second character, the first character. Um, did all of their voices come in really clear to you while you were writing? Was there one that gave you a little bit more trouble than the other?
I yeah, actually when I started writing the first book, I kind of had a little bit of an idea of Kara's story, but when I started writing book two, I wasn't completely sure, um, especially about Mia, what her story was. But I knew I wanted to have three very distinct voices. And I really thought Ellie from the first book had more story to explore. So, and she's just fun to write. And so I really enjoyed writing her story. And I did have more or less a sense of where she was going. But Mia was kind of the scary one to write because I didn't really know what her journey was, or um, what it was going to end up being. And so that, yeah, while I was writing, it started to become clearer as to what her story was and where she was going to end up. But yeah, she was maybe the hardest one to write. But I really I'm glad I wrote her. Yeah.
I think, it was interesting because in, reading her and reading her talk about the Ainu religion, and just sort of, how it was like very interesting how she carried all of that with her, and then she also carried like this culture and unity. And then, she didn't have a drop of she said something indigenous Alaska, one of the indigenous Alaskan tribes in it, but she was sort of able to pass that way too. She really was in so many ways a ghost to read. And I can understand why she might give you a little bit more trouble in that way. But that said, she really made sort of like the perfect, phantom to sort of imprint on both, the story, to sort of carry what was happening in the background, because she was so elusive. At least that's kind of how I read her.
Yeah, yeah. I was asked on another interview about the meaning of the title Village in the Dark. And so it is, there's the physical aspect of it, which is it's off the grid, so it gets very dark, of course. But also metaphorically, I felt like um it's her journey where she's in the dark when she's living there without knowing what it's like in man's world. And so um, that's why she ventures out, because she wants to get knowledge. And so that's how I kind of looked at it.
So Alaska is a really interesting place to set a story. Are you from or have you lived in Alaska? Have you visited a lot?
I am not from Alaska. I did visit for research, and I actually did stay in the city that inspired the first book. And I stayed in the inn that Ellie, the that it's modeled after, that Ellie runs this inn that's just a floor of rooms that you can rent in the building. Of course, her character is completely fictional. But the rooms, you can actually stay, and I wouldn't stay in winter. I actually stayed in summer. It's actually quite pleasant in summer because you get a nice view and the weather's fine. But I don't think I would want to stay there in the winter.
Yeah, and I think that that's absolutely fascinating that you can stay there though at all.
Yeah, you can still stay there. There are the real city actually also has other inns outside the building. In my fictional city, it's only that one building.
So you mentioned you wouldn't not necessarily return to this world, but you are working on something else. What do you have sort of in the mix, or can you not say at all?
No, I'm saying I wouldn't say no to going back to Cara Kennedy and that world, and maybe, some of the other characters, exploring them. But for my book that I'm outlining right now, it's a completely different story in a different setting, not in Alaska. It's in Europe, and yeah, I don't want to say too much because it's just an outline, so I feel like it's so premature. But I am also working on a audio series for BBC, and they tell me that it will air sometime in the end towards the end of this year. And it is a historical World War II drama. So I'm not sure if I'm allowed to talk about it, but I think I'm sure I can say that much.
That's pretty cool. I think it's really great how sort of audio dramas have had this great resurgence. I remember hearing, I mean, that was like the original entertainment way back when. And now there's so many of them that are, really have, coming up and becoming popular. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to flex, the writing muscles and trying different media. So with the radio, knowing that everything is vocal, like everything comes out in dialogue, and then how do you uh describe something, how do you make it not visual, but they have to know where they are and everything. There's a lot of, so it's been fun trying all this different media. Obviously film is a very visual media, and then book, it's all about descriptions, and with audio, it's only dialogue. So it's been interesting to try out these different formats. And I remember, like, as a kid, when radio plays would sometimes come out, and that it was fun to listen to. So it's fun to write.
Do you have, I mean, was it really difficult for you to switch gears between, I guess, screenwriting and novel writing and now audio drama?
I mean, the basic tenets of storytelling, I think, cross over, and they kind of work. So writing screenplays really helped me, I think, come up with like the idea of arcs and what's kind of the 3-act structure and all of that. And so I think I've carried that over into books, but I do I did always want to write a book, and I just couldn't finish one. And I think writing screenplays has really helped me finish, because now I know how to structure it and where it's going. And then so audio is it's kind of the same, it's a series, but it's kind of like I still think of it as a 3-act structure in the beginning, the middle, and the end. And just kind of expanded over the 6 episodes. And I also did a musical stage play once for Tokyo Disney Sea, and that was
Oh
also
my
completely
goodness.
different. Yeah, it was like you have to think about what's the pre-show, and I'm like, pre-show. So there's this thing where also how do you interact with the audience, which again is completely different from any other form of writing. So I actually enjoy it, though. I like the challenges, and then trying to think of a different way of writing. It's actually very fun.
I guess that brings me to sort of just my last question, because everything was laid out really nicely in The Village in the Dark, as far as when things were revealed and just how much information came from where. Do you very carefully outline everything before, or do you have just sort of a basic idea of where it's going and it fills itself in as the story expands?
I think that's what the one thing I learned from screenwriting, because they always want you to write a treatment. So you always have kind of an idea of the beginning, the middle, and the end. And you may not have all the details. So when I was writing both City Under One Roof and Village in the Dark, I also had to turn in my outlines. So, there was not actually a choice. You had to outline, but I think it's a good idea, because that's what helps you not have writer's block. I'm not saying that I never have writer's block, but it helps you get through writer's block, because you know where you're going to go in general. And so if you're stuck on a scene, you can kind of skip it and just go to another one and just start writing that, so you don't kind of, you know, just have these days where you're just crying in bed or whatever. But you can actually write something and get through it if you have a goalpost. And, of course, the outline is never followed completely. It always changes as you start writing, and the characters start speaking to you and everything changes. But again, it's really nice to have the goalpost. So I think my process has been in both screenwriting and in novel writing to just do a vomit draft, is what I call it, where you just don't stop. You don't edit yourself, because it's never going to be perfect in your first draft, and everything's going to change. So you write very sparsely, and you just kind of just go with your flow, like what your train of thought is, and then you go back and edit like at least a couple more times before it's readable.
Thank you so much. This was really fun. And this book is coming out the end of February, I believe.
In the middle, it's coming out February 13th, so the day
February
before
13th.
Valentine's Day.
February is like a really weird month, because I feel like it's one of those months where it's the middle, but also like the next week it's the end.
Yes, a short month, right?
Right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I do hope that you come back for whatever else you're working on, and check out both The City Under One Roof and The Village in the Dark. And I thank you once again for coming on Turn the Page. This is Jessica. Our guest today was Iris Yamashita, and we are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.